town office or over Zoom, so we'll keep an eye on both. The agenda has minutes as the first item, but I think it makes sense to just jump right into the public hearing if everyone's okay with that. Hi, Pam. I think the minutes we can discuss afterward, if that's all right with everyone. Sure. We'll just get the public hearing done. Yeah, great. Well, thanks everyone for coming, and everyone on Zoom. Ken, it looks like Pete and Emily Benson are trying to join as well.
They should be able to.
Yeah. So the public hearing tonight is with regard to a draft management plan or general stewardship plan for Prospect Farm, a town-owned property up at the end of Carter Notch Road. The Conservation Commission has been working on this draft for the better part of the last year and has spent several meetings putting together what's inside and what's available on the town website for review. And it sounds like what some of you have been able to take a look at. In particular, I'd like to thank Ken for what I assume are hours and hours and hours of time that he spent on this, both researching the history of Prospect Farm and then typing up the large majority of what's in this draft plan. And then everyone else in the Conservation Commission, thanks for your input over several meetings, like I said, to get it to the point where it is. A couple of weeks ago, we went to a select board meeting and discussed this draft of the plan with the select board. They hadn't had the opportunity to review it. We had a couple good points of discussion that came up at that meeting and made a couple minor changes to what was the draft at that point, and those changes are now incorporated into what's sitting in front of us. There are copies up here on the table, and it is the same version that's on the town website now. So yeah, the idea for tonight is just to hear the public's input on this draft and on Prospect Farm in general, how best we can incorporate your thoughts and ideas into this management plan and the management of Prospect Farm into the future. I think we'll probably try to limit the public hearing, if it's necessary to limit it, to 45 minutes or an hour, and hopefully give everyone an opportunity to express their thoughts and ask any questions that they have here tonight. So with that, I think I will, and I guess I'll just say that the idea with this stewardship plan is eventually to have it approved by the town at town meeting in 2022. And so we're on a good timeline right now to incorporate public comment, create another draft as necessary, and then in February or March put forward the final version that will be voted on at town meeting. So yeah, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ken to give a general overview of the plan itself and what's inside. Like I said, Ken has spent a long time working on this and has incorporated all of the Conservation Commission's thoughts into the draft that we're reviewing tonight. And so thanks for your work, Ken, and I'll pass it off to you.
Great, thanks, Jeff. What I'm going to do is just go through the plan very briefly. Everybody, I think, has had a chance to both see it and read it, but I do want to just give a quick summary of it so that we can have as much time as possible getting your input. First off, the goals of the plan are to meet the intent of the donor and the town's vote when it accepted this property. The second goal is to describe the relevant past and current ordinances, town votes, agreements that the town has with, like, the U.S. Forest Service, White Mountain National Forest, Jackson Ski Touring Foundation, etc., as well as how well does it match up with the town master plan. And then the third objective is to update the recreational use regulations and policies where appropriate, providing recreational use without overly promoting this area and taking into consideration the abutters, because that's extremely important as well. And as Jeff mentioned, we started this actually, I think a year ago, last summer. We had a questionnaire that went out to townsfolk. We had a very good response. We segregated them into residents, non-resident taxpayers, as well as just non-residents. And once we'd finished that questionnaire, it was pretty clear that almost everybody was answering the questions the same way. So there were some concerns expressed out there that it was going to be biased by an outside group as opposed to townsfolk, but that indeed was not the case. I think one of the most impressive things, or most important things that probably came out of that questionnaire is most people did not know where the boundaries of Prospect Farm were, understanding that when most people recreate up there, they're recreating on private land, they're recreating on town land, and they're also recreating on White Mountain National Forest land. They're using that general area as a big unit, not just as Prospect Farm. And the idea is also to take into consideration the land abutters and what their regulations are, as well as to protect the natural resources that are up there. This plan references the forest management plan. There's a little bit of the cart got before the horse because the town actually put together a forest management plan in 2003. It updated it in 2020, last year. However, this land was actually donated to the town and was voted to be accepted by the town as a recreation land, not as a town forest. And that's something that we got as we went through some of the history that's out there. Very briefly, if you're not familiar with the boundaries, figure 1 in the stewardship plan shows you the boundaries where it is, and then a figure a little bit later shows you the Jackson Ski Touring Foundation map of its current trail system up there, and you'll see that most of those trails actually end up going off Prospect Farm onto abutting properties, be it the Lyons property, Valentine's property, or the White Mountain National Forest. Now, it's very interesting when you go back, you can look at page 4, and this gives Edith Baker's donor's intent in the will that she wrote when she passed this land on to the National Forest. Understanding that she was donating this land about the same time as the White Mountain National Forest was actually being created. And if you read the language in her will, she's talking about this Prospect Farm property, once it passes to the town, to actually be integrated with the Forest Reserve. At that time, when the National Forest System was being created, it was called the Forest Reserve. So I think it's pretty clear that her intention was to see some sort of symbiosis coming between these two, and not just to have this as a little island by itself out there. She actually makes the donation to the town upon the death of her husband in 1919. She's not happy with the way that the town accepts it, and she finally gets a Mr. Gale to put it on as an article to be voted on by the town. And in 1938, the town votes to accept Prospect Farm as a recreation ground. So again, her language in the town vote that accepts the property up there is very clear that the primary purpose here and intent was recreation ground. Her son, and she actually leaves the property to her son, and upon her son's death, the property is to turn over to the town. He passes, and the town takes ownership in 1955, and then sort of ironically, the town clear cuts much of that property in the early 1960s. The town creates a conservation commission in 1969, which was actually the work of the late Betty Whitney that most of you folks probably know. And in 1972, the Conservation Commission, along with the Citizens Commission, puts forth Article 54, and those elements that were passed are on page 6 of the plan. And part of what I'm trying to show here is what we did is we tried to take all of the existing ordinances and intents that were out there before. It wasn't to try to change these, it was to try to build on those, and in some cases needed to update it because recreational uses have changed since the time that the town picked up the property. So there's 5 current ordinances that are directly related to Prospect Farm. They're noise, litter, fireworks, camping, and Class 6 roads, and I'll get on to these in a little bit later. And there's also several memorandums of understanding that the town has developed with the White Mountain National Forest. These include the use of the roads that the Forest Service can use to access its timber properties, and it was also when the trailhead for the trails that go up onto the White Mountain National Forest was moved off the Valentine property up onto what we call Boggy Brook. The Forest Service and the town developed that parking lot so that the public had access to the Forest Service trails. That parking lot is also used by many people who are using Prospect Farm itself. And then there is one memorandum of understanding that's with Jackson Ski Touring Foundation, and I'll get to that a little bit later. There are 3 abutters to Prospect Farm. There's the Lyons property, which is landlocked and does not abut the Class 6 road, so it's basically a landlocked property. There's the Ballantyne property. Many people don't realize when they go up there to cross-country ski or to snowshoe up there in the winter, they're actually parking on private property. They're not parking on town land at all. In fact, you have to really get up to Camp Gout before you're entering Prospect Farm, and you can see that on the map. And then there's the White Mountain National Forest. And these landowners have different restrictions on their property. Just to be clear, Mr. Ballantyne does not want hunting on his property. He does not want motorized vehicle use on his property, but he does allow non-motorized pedestrian use and ski trails and so forth on his property. In addition, the White Mountain National Forest has management areas that surround Prospect Farm. Their management areas are basically for non-motorized recreation as well as for forestry. The Forest Service does allow snowmobiling and parts of the forest, but this part of the forest that abuts Prospect Farm does not allow it. So again, you have 450 acres up there that are basically surrounded by properties that do not allow motorized recreation on their property. And I should point out that parking in the summer is actually up on town land. During the winter, the parking is actually on land that is Mr. Ballantyne's property, and the Jackson Ski Touring Foundation has a long-term agreement with Mr. Ballantyne. It was a ski touring foundation that actually paid for, developed, and actually maintains that. And then the Jackson Ski Touring Foundation also has a smaller parking lot, approximately a quarter mile back down the road, which they also maintain, and that is the parking that exists in the winter. Moving on, when you get into section 2, and here I'm going to describe the regulations and recommendations that we have. Understanding that a regulation is something that would be required to be implemented. A recommendation is essentially something that we think is a good idea that should proceed ahead. And there's usually conditions as to why those things may or may not happen out into the future. So let me just walk down through these real quickly. Forestry, the regulation here is to follow a forest management plan that's been developed by a professional forest manager. There's been 2 done, as I mentioned before, 2003 and 2020. And also to have those updated periodically. Forest management plans should be updated periodically. Understanding that forestry is not the priority use up there. It is recreation. So the forestry needs to take into consideration its impact on recreation, because that was the purpose for which it was donated and the purpose for which the town accepted it. That does not mean that good forestry can't be complementary to recreational uses up there. The second is natural ecosystems. We now have a much better feel about recreational use up there. We have a pretty good understanding about the forest up there and how to manage it. What we're lacking actually is a good inventory, is just what are the natural ecosystems up there. Do we have unique species and so on and so forth. So the recommendation here is to have an ecological inventory done. The third recommendation is on the stump dump. As recommended by the professional forester, the stump dump, through their recommendation, and I'll touch on this in a second, is to actually close the stump dump up there. The stump dump has become the source of soils that have been brought in, and knotweed has popped up in that stump dump. And the problem that you have up there is sort of multifold relative to foreign soils are being imported with non-native species that can become aggressive. As many people here in town know, knotweed loves to get into drainage ditches, etc. One only needs to see Moody Farm Road or coming down parts of Wilson Road, etc. And if you want to really see a serious infestation, if you look at the just before you get to the parking lot on the right-hand side going south, or the west side down near Storyland, you can see how badly knotweed can proliferate. And the town has had to spend a chunk of change actually managing knotweed along its roads using herbicides, which is about the only way once it gets going. So the professional forester recommends that. I would just say on the side that earlier in my career, I actually worked with non-native species, and I worked with the state of New Hampshire developing its aquatic weed control system. There is no better way to stop something than to stop it before it starts, because if it gets in and gets heavily infested, as we know with knotweed in part of the town, then you're down to long-term management as opposed to eradicating. You still have a chance to eradicate up there, but if the stump dump continues, you will run the risk again of just reintroducing and reintroducing. And I think in addition, the Forest Service has a very aggressive program to prevent non-native species. The stump dump is right butting against the Forest Service property. And in the forest, if you're going to bring in machinery to do any forestry or any trail building, etc., you have to have all your machines and everything checked before you can even do any work to make sure that there's none native. So that's the recommendation that the professional forester put in the forest management plan. It's also the recommendation of this commission. Signage, it's recommended to update the kiosk up there. It's a little outdated and just needs an uplift. And once this stewardship plan is put forth, and we would also list the regulations and so forth up there as well. Roads, motorized vehicles, and parking. The only place where you're permitted to actually drive a motor vehicle on Prospect Farm is up to the summer parking lot. You're not allowed to drive from the gate all the way up to Hall's Ledge. And that actually, even though it's a Class 6 road, the town did vote in the 1972 recommendations to not allow a motorized vehicle. And it's the consensus of this group as well, that because the Hall's Ledge road that goes up there is very steep, it ruts real easily, it's real wet soils, and if you started to run vehicles up there, you would run into some very serious erosion problems and so forth. So the gate is there. With permission, if you've shot a moose or something up there, you can get the key from the town to go up to access that. And in addition, the emergency vehicles, etc., can get through there as well. And then during this winter, which is when you have snow and erosion is not an issue, then obviously you can get vehicles up there. I mean the groomers and so forth as well. And then parking, the recommendation here is to convert the stump dump into a parking lot. If anybody's been up there during the summer, you'll see that there's a lot of people up there running now, walking their dogs, and that summer parking lot gets filled very frequently, and you cannot count on the Ballantyne parking lot in the summer. Mr. Ballantyne at times actually uses that with his camper up there. That is his property, and there is a need to expand a little bit of the summer parking up there. Motorized recreation use, 450 acres is not a very big area when you get into motorized use, and the regulations here would be no motorized recreation. If you put ATVs on those roads, you would have some serious erosion problems. And then in addition, the abutting landowners, both the Forest Service and Mr. Ballantyne, don't permit it. And nor do they permit snowmobiling up there as well. And there would also be a safety issue with any kind of snowmobiling there with the cross-country skiers as well, with skiers coming down and snowmobiles coming up. It's an extremely limited area, and there's also no winter parking for snowmobiles to be trucked up there. Somebody would have to dump the snowmobile off and then ride back down to town and then walk back up, or have somebody drive back up to access them. But for safety reasons, and because of the abutting properties, and you don't want the spillover effect of something like that onto the abutting properties, the recommendation here, the regulation here would be no motorized recreation. With biking, yes on the roads, no in the winter. Biking here would allow Class 1 and Class 2 e-bikes. Class 1 and Class 2 e-bikes are considered by state law to be regular bikes, not to be motorized recreation. This gives that area some access to people who are handicapped, and there's a lot of motorized out there. Class 1 and 2 e-bikes, if you're not familiar with it, are actually quite limited on how fast they can go and the size of the motor. A Class E3 bicycle, e-bike, is actually an electric motorcycle for all practical purposes. Those would not be permitted. The recommendation here is if there was a group that wanted to develop some single track mountain bike trails up there, you would have to have a group come forward to make a recommendation to this group that they would build those. They would have to take into consideration the natural resource and wetland constraints up there before approval would come from the commission here to allow it. It does not prohibit it. It just simply says if it's going to happen, it has to go through a specific process before you get there. Overnight camping. The current ordinance is overnight camping is not permitted up there. That would be continued with one exception, that the selectmen can give a special permit. So if you had a Boy Scout troop or something that wanted to camp up there, they would have to go to the selectmen and get permission. But the idea is you don't want camping up there, roadside, etc., such as what you see on certain parts of the White Mountain National Forest, etc. And that just stays within the ordinances that exist right now. Hunting has always been a historic use up there. And so the regulations here would be, yes, that hunting can continue, but it would follow the White Mountain National Forest rules, and I believe these are state rules, which is you can't shoot from the roads, you can't shoot from a trail, and you can't shoot across a road or a trail. And this also, there's a little bit of conflict here because the National Forest System allows hunting. Mr. Ballantyne does not allow hunting on his property. So anybody that was to hunt there would actually have to start their hunt above Camp Gout, not parking in Mr. Ballantyne's property, because much of that land around his parking lot is actually his property, and that is posted as no hunting, and that is his right. Hiking, walking, snowshoeing, and pets. These are permitted uses up there with just the exception that during the winter, because of the grooming that is occurring, that you are allowed to snowshoe there, but not to just foot walk, because that ends up causing foot posting, that sort of stuff, which can be a safety issue, particularly when you go up the Halls Ledge Trail, which is quite steep. Noise, litter, and fireworks, there's town ordinances that essentially prohibit these. That would be the regulation to continue up there as well. In commercial use, only with selectmen permission. It has to have insurance, and it can't conflict with the general purposes for which Prospect Farm. So if somebody wanted to hold a wedding up there, that would probably be deemed acceptable. If somebody wanted to go up and put up all kinds of banners and this, that, and the other stuff, and run a major commercial operation, that final decision would be by the selectmen, but their filter would be, does it really meet the intent of Prospect Farm? Then in addition, there are three sort of general recommendations up here. One of those would be to explore if the landowner who owns the 100 acres of landlocked parcel up there was interested in selling that property to the town at a fair market value, to explore that option, but that option only is a willing seller, willing buyer situation. That parcel would allow for an expansion of the kind of trail systems that are up there in the future. The second is to take a look at a longer term arrangements with the Jackson Ski Touring Foundation. Currently, for example, the town plows up almost to the parking lot, but not to the parking lot that's used in the winter. Vice versa, the Jackson Ski Touring Foundation is up there with its trail crews, and currently it's either town or hired people that are coming in to maintain the roads and the ditches and those types of things. So the recommendation is to see whether there's some sort of symbiotic relationship here that could be expanded using their staff up there to clear the views, those types of things, and then vice versa, the town possibly doing the plowing for that remaining section up through. That's just thrown out as a concept. Maybe an arrangement could be made with the selectmen, maybe not, but the recommendation here is to explore those operations. And then the third is to take into consideration the ongoing climate change. Prospect Farm, because of its elevation and its aspect, actually is some of the best snow when there's not much snow around here for cross-country skiing, for snowshoeing, etc. And so that should be taken into consideration as well as the forest management plan. We're probably going to start to see a shift in some of the forest species that can survive the warming climate that we have. And the forest management plan should take that into consideration. And similarly, as we move ahead with any trail or maintaining the roads up there, you have the same issue where we're now having more frequent major storms. Your culverts are going to be washing out, etc. So as we look forward, as we build culverts and so forth on the town property roads up there, it should really take into consideration that they're going to have to be sized larger because of some of the events that are happening up there. I'm not going to go through the forest management plan, but this plan does adopt the forest management plan that came through in 2020, understanding again that forestry is not the principal purpose. So with that, that's the overview, and I think we can open it up there to discussions. And if there's folks online that want to hit the chat button, and if you've got questions, hit them in on the chat, and we can go from there. So we'll first look at the audience that's here and ask for your input.
And I'll just say quickly, with regard to Zoom, if you do want to speak rather than type your comment into the chat, you can just say, into the chat, I have a question or I have a comment, and I'll write your name down, and we'll jump to that once we have a moment. So, yeah, please feel free to raise your hand, and we'll try to give everyone a chance to speak. Okay, any comments or questions from those here in attendance? Yes.
Hi, I'm Catherine, my husband Chris, and we're new to town, so we didn't participate in any of this. I first of all want to thank Mrs. Baker and the town of Jackson for accepting the gift and for all the hard work that everybody's done. I think this is great. The one thing I have is my question is on commercial use. I'm just wondering if it would make sense to have a little more guidance in general ideas of what would and would not be acceptable, so that you're not putting the selectmen in a quandary in future years. There are lots of different kinds of commercial use, some of which we can't even imagine right now, but I think that it would be helpful for the select board to have just a little bit more guidance at the beginning of what would be acceptable commercial use. Thanks.
Thank you. Any comments or thoughts on that at the moment?
This came up as a reminder, the last meeting I think we had, and so we did insert it, but I think we can put a little bit better boundaries around that.
I mean, even using the examples that you had. What
I think one of the reasons that we hadn't, I think it's a good suggestion. I think one of the reasons that we hadn't is sometimes if you start listing specifics, when it gets looked on 10 years later, 15 years down the road, they're like, well, these are the things mentioned. This isn't mentioned. If there's some commercial use that doesn't exist now, but will in 5 years. So I think it is a good idea to expand some, but we did talk a little bit about not wanting to be hedged in by what we actually physically write down, what we don't.
Yeah, and the only other thing I would add to that, I do think we can find some general language to add to that particular point. And something I've seen in the past is, we've identified some of the goals for the stewardship of this property. One general guideline that could be used is any commercial use should not impact the stewardship goals that are outlined in the front part of this management plan. So I think there is some additional language we could add there. It'd probably still be fairly general, just to allow for future, like Mike said, future things that we're not thinking of right now. But yeah, thank you. Yes, Ellen?
I'm Ellen Chandler with the Ski Touring Foundation, and I guess I would just like to say that we are very appreciative of the relationship that we have with the town, and hope that we're fulfilling all of our obligations so far, and look forward to many future years, plan and willing.
Thank you, Ellen. Anyone else here in
There-
attendance
there's
at
a
the town.
question.
We have a couple things on the chat that we can jump
Yeah.
to. There's nothing at the moment. So actually, I think Robert had indicated he had a question or would like to speak first, and then we have a question from Peter and Emily Benson. So, Robert, it looks like you're unmuted. Can you hear us?
Yes. Question is regarding parking. And I'm wondering, and I didn't have a chance to study the draft or anything, whether there's any consideration or even possibility of expanding parking. And when I mention parking, I'm speaking to both summertime and wintertime, because the summertime lot is somewhat limited, and then people start parking on the road, and that can be somewhat of a mess sometimes. And winters also can be an issue at times, and I don't know whether that might change. And I perfectly understand that if we expand too much parking, then you have more pressure on the area and stuff. But I don't know, some balance in that. And I didn't know whether that was anything that a subject that was being considered or at least looked at, or potentially in the future, depending on how things go and the final plan and so forth.
Thanks for that question, Robert. Ken?
Yeah, I think as mentioned, we have looked at the summer issue. It's, what many people don't recognize is when you get to the summer parking lot, then there's a gate, and then you go a little bit further, and then you're actually at the stump dump. And then you go a little bit further, and you're actually at the boundary of the White Mountain National Forest. And the purpose of the gate in the summer is to prevent people illegally going up to use the stump dump. The recommendation that we have here is to close the stump dump and then convert that space where the stump dump is into additional summer parking. And it would probably have the current capacity at the summer parking up there now is 6. I mean, I go up there frequently, and the parking lot up there is not unusual to see it filled, including even during weekdays here post the summer season. So there is definitely a need. Any expansion of the winter parking, since the winter parking is being held on private property, would have to be in a discussion with the private landowner to see whether they were open to having that expansion or not. If you try to move parking up further in the winter, then essentially you're starting to break up the ski trail system where you'd ski, have to take off and move on. So there's quite a bit of conflict if you tried to move it up onto town land during the winter relative to the amount of use and type of use that's happening up there right now. I think in addition, we have heard from some folks where in the winter, where if there's low snow, there's high demand for Prospect Farm. A parking spot can turn over 3, 4, 5 times during the course of the day during the winter. During the summer, that's not the norm. But during the winter, it is the norm. And then if you start adding on the volume of traffic, etc., if you try to expand that parking lot too large, now you're starting to put a lot of traffic on Carter Notch Road, which brings up some other issues with the landowners on Carter Notch. It can be explored with the Valentine about expansion, but I don't think you're looking at, going from what is now a 29-car lot into a 100-car lot. And I would also point out that the demand during the winter is really dependent. If that's the only skiing demand is super high, when the rest of the ski touring system is open, the demand tends to meet, the amount of space up there tends to meet demand. And I don't know if that answered your question, Robert, but yes, we have looked at it.
Okay, thank you for the information.
Thank you, Robert. There was a question from Peter and Emily Benson. Let me scroll to that here. It says, how many commercial entities currently have agreements to use Prospect Farm? I don't know the answer to that question.
Well, the Ski Touring Foundation is a nonprofit that has a cooperative agreement with the town. In fact, if townspeople want to ski on the town portion, they can ski on the town portion for free. They cannot leave the town portion, though, and then spill out onto the National Forest System, because the Ski Touring Foundation is paying a special use permit to the forest system, to the Forest Service for that use up there. There are no other agreements that I came across outside of forestry is actually a commercial operation in the end.
Can I further clarify that, Jeff? This is Emily Henson.
Sure, Emily.
Yeah, we were just curious because we have seen some commercial dog walking entities up there, and there are folks doing guided hikes or stuff like that. Just like they need some sort of special use permit with the forest. Yeah, it'd be great to make sure that everybody has the agreements. I was happy to see. We were happy to see that recommendation in the plan. So something to keep in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Any other comments or questions from those here at the town?
I'd like to speak, if I could.
Sure, please do, Dick.
Okay, it's the same idea that I brought up in our last meeting about whether this would be opened up to the general public or whether it would be for Jackson residents. Now, it's just another thought, but I believe that the property could have been deeded to the National Forest if that was the intent. And I think that the land was left to the town of Jackson. Now, whether we allow for commercial use, like ski touring, you say it's a nonprofit, still it's a commercial enterprise. And I think the problems that we're seeing with the general public will just be magnified. We have the problems at the falls. We always have parking problems, even in the winter. As you stated, Ken, summer parking is somewhat limited, and there's limited turnover of the parking spaces. Somebody's, starting there and headed north on Forest Service trails. They might not be back for a day or two. So I think that we really have to consider whether this is going to be open to the general public or if it's going to be for the recreational use of the citizens of Jackson. And I believe in the wording that we could go either way on that. I don't think that it's definitive one way or the other. That's enough of that. And I was just going to say that when Ken talked about bike trails that might be developed, and permission would have to be from the commission. It wouldn't come from the commission, it would come from the selectmen as a minor point, but the commission can make recommendations and the selectmen would go on it. Thank you.
Yeah, and Dick, and I know you and I, we've had this conversation before. At least my read of her will is, and we did sort of chase this out because it had come up in a town meeting when I was plowing through all the town records. And it was said at one town meeting that this property was just given for the residents of Jackson, but the record doesn't, it definitely has nothing in it that suggests that is indeed the case. I'm just reading from her will right here, but she's saying that she gave it to the inhabitants of the town of Jackson to be used for a public park as part of the forest reserve. Public park, part of the forest reserve becoming the White Mountain National Forest. There's also no record, when I went back through the records, that Edith Baker ever prohibited the general public from using her property. If there is something out there, I could not find it, but I did search to see whether she had ever, prohibited others from using it. But it's to the contrary. She says basically this is to be a unit with a forest reserve. And I would also point out that the selectmen over time have developed memorandums of understanding. And a classic example would be the current parking lot, which is to access from the town land on to the National Forest trailheads. The National Forest System has had real problems because many trailheads start on private land and then penetrate into public lands. And so the town has had a history of actually developing stuff with the Forest Service that is for the general public, not just for the residents on the town of Jackson's Prospect Farm properties. So the best that, at least I could put together in reading through all of this is if there ever was an intention that this be Jackson residents only, there's nothing in the record that suggests that that is indeed the case.
Yeah, and I would
There's
just,
nothing in the record to state either idea.
Yeah.
So I was just putting forward an alternate idea to be considered. I don't think we can definitively say that it was left to the general public. It was left to the town of Jackson. And then we go into interpretation. And you've made a very fine interpretation, and you've stated your side of it, your points, and I'm just offering an alternative thought on how to view the property.
I think that the most concise way that I can personally summarize the issue is that I'm fairly convinced by what Ken has presented in the management plan, in that there's nothing apparent that Edith Baker intended for it to be used only by residents of Jackson. That being the case, we're not suggesting that anything has changed here. Should be changed here. It's historically been open to the public, and my feeling is that the Conservation Commission as a whole had kind of come to a consensus that we agreed with this interpretation, that historically it's been open to the public, and that we are in favor of that continuing to be the case, and certainly not in favor of restricting it to Jackson residents only at this time. So that's my read of the consensus of the Conservation Commission, given that we've had a few conversations about this at previous meetings. Is there anyone else on the commission that would disagree with that, or has anything to add to that conversation? And this, I think, relates to a question that Ed Harvey just typed into the chat, which was, please define citizen of Jackson. Jackson Falls is full-time residents only. Are we talking about shutting out second homeowner taxpayers again? And I would just reiterate that the draft management plan as presented here tonight does not recommend limiting public access to Prospect Farm.
Yeah, and just reading the chat here, it says Jackson Falls is full-time residents only. That is not the case. In fact, if you go back and you read the history of the land that was given to the town of Jackson, the rights were retained by the Wentworth for all of their folks that come to the Wentworth, etc. And many of those people are not town residents; they're not even taxpayers. Yeah. So
it was a quick chat I was typing in. Sorry, this was that.
Yeah.
Quick
Yeah.
chat. Typically referring to the parking spots.
Yeah.
The two new ones that are full-time resident only. I understand the falls for not.
Yeah.
Generally Jackson residents.
So, Ed, do you feel that your question was answered there?
I guess I'm asking, so the Conservation Commission is, there's sort of two ideas floating around. I understand that was just kind of floating an idea. I'm trying to clarify. Is he floating Jackson residents only, or is he floating the town of Jackson, second homeowner taxpayers?
I would say it would be town of Jackson, everybody that gets to live here. Second homeowners, taxpayers. Again, it's just the, I haven't tried to refine the idea. I'm not trying to limit it just to full-time residents by any means. It's just an alternative view. And because what's going to come at us down the road, if we're open to the public, how many new headaches are we going to have to face? So, I don't think it's limiting to just full-time residents. And also, I wasn't asking to change the wording of the draft.
So I think the draft that's here doesn't recommend any changes to public access, and that's generally what we've agreed upon as the Conservation Commission. It also doesn't mean that at some point, if the town as a whole decided to change that in the future, that couldn't be the case. But what we're recommending as the Conservation Commission is not to change that for the time being. Is that?
Absolutely. I totally accept that.
This is Peter Benson. Can I just say a brief thing? I sent into a chat. I kind of see both sides of this. It's a challenge, and short of any definitive legal review on this, I think having it be ambiguous is the best we're going to be. I mean, inhabitants can mean residents or just people who are inhabiting an Airbnb for a weekend. So you have to define inhabitants. You have to make a lot of definitions. I think that the challenge here is that we've all seen a dramatic increase in the amount of use on lands that used to be pretty lightly used. It's not just Prospect Farm. It's not just Jackson. It's all over. And I think people are concerned that we are being loved to death, and it's hard for a resident and a local to find a parking spot to go on a ski when it used to be quite easy. So, but I guess I would suggest letting it remain ambiguous unless somebody wants to go down the rabbit hole of legal review, because that gets costly and it has a tendency to polarize.
Peter, just a question for you. Do you see language within the draft as it's currently presented that is, I suppose, is unambiguous, or that we should change in order to kind of fit what you're talking about there?
No, I think it's okay. I mean, when you read deeds, the first sentences are the most important. But I think keeping it, the way it is would be fine. I mean, in the ideal world, in a dream world, there would be, I think, things have worked out fairly well at Jackson Falls, all things considered. I give a lot of kudos to people who put in all the hard work to try and wrap their heads around the management of that site, and I've heard nothing but praise for some resident parking spots. It's been a nice thing to have. In my dream world, it would be nice to have that at the end of Cardinal Road too, but I know that's probably not a reality. But it is frustrating at times, I will say, and putting my provincial hat on, or putting our provincial hats on, to not be able to go up there and recreate, because it does get very, very crowded, and we only go miles on the trail.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks, Dick and Ed, for your contributions to that discussion. Largely, though, I guess what I'm hearing is that there aren't any changes or edits suggested to the plan as it's presented here, but more so, I guess,
With
suggestions
the
that
exception of refining the commercial use.
Yes, I'm referring to this specific discussion about public access, and that it seems like everyone agrees that this will probably be an ongoing conversation, but that what we have in the plan as it stands now doesn't make any definitive stance or suggest any changes to the way things have historically been managed in terms of public access.
I think I do want to just quickly say that I think it's good for everyone as we have these discussions to keep in mind that there are a lot of people who don't live in Jackson that have put countless hours of sweat and blood into maintaining trails and love those areas. So I think it's really important that, you know, when we have these conversations in the future that, you know, there's a lot of people that really like that area that spend countless more time than I do, than lots of people up there maintaining trails, clearing brush and doing things. And so I think to even entertain the idea of shutting out public access to that place makes me really kind of nervous to even kind of entertain or have these discussions. So I would advise us to tread very lightly around these conversations. Oh, and I also, because the wheels are turning so slowly in my head, I did want to just go back to Emily's comment about commercial use, and that was that one of the things we had talked about with commercial use is that unless you're going up to Hall's Ledge, you get off of Prospect Farm property like really quickly. And so, assumedly, and I don't know if these people have these things or not, but assumedly, if there are people guiding dog walking services, things like that, they should have an outfitter's guide from the Forest Service. There's a permit process through the Forest Service that they should have on their person pretty much the moment they go past the stump dump or the gate, you know, going out the other way. And I don't know if people know that or not, but that would be a good thing to maybe connect with the Forest Service and investigate a little bit, because if we have to go down that route, if we're thinking of commercial permitting, it would be good to sync things in line with what they're doing. So that way, a person who applies for that permit doesn't have to apply for, you know, you don't want someone to have to apply to 10 different places to get a permit to walk a half mile down a road. So just something to kind of think about as well. I really think Hall's Ledge is the only place you could go and not leave Prospect Farm, right? Is there anywhere else you could go and not really? Yeah.
Yeah.
So just 2 thoughts.
Thanks, Mike. Anything else from the Conservation Commission on that subject?
Not on that, but on one of the first or second point that Dick was making about selectmen authorization would be required for any new trail being built. We don't have that in the language, but in our policy recommendation for biking trails, if we were just to add a line and subject to selectmen review. I know like the Conservation Commission does have an interest in seeing that an environmental review occurs, but as what I'm taking Dick's comment to be that it's ultimately selectmen's decision if something like that were to occur.
Yeah, I think we could change the wording to be like, ideally with the Conservation Commission's recommendation to the select board for their final approval. And we could establish a process or whatever if we wanted to get into the weeds of what that would be, so that the select board would have a full proposal to look at.
I think Dick's point was just that it's not solely to the discretion of the Conservation Commission to allow future uses.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that would ultimately be kind of what this whole thing is about to a certain degree, is defining all that stuff. To make those decisions easier and have guidelines, whereas currently there's nothing at all.
Well, it's just about 8 o'clock. If there are any last questions or comments, be happy to hear them. Okay, seeing none here at the town, and I don't see any others on Zoom. Feel free to unmute and speak now if you have anything else to say. Okay, I guess with that we'll close out the public hearing, and I think it would probably make sense for us as a commission to to vote on moving this draft forward, but with incorporating the couple of changes that we've talked about here tonight. One suggestion from Catherine to incorporate language regarding commercial use to further define or specify what something might look like. And then, as Dick and Ben suggested, essentially adding some language about select board approval for trails. And I guess we should probably look at other sections if there's anything else that specifically says Conservation Commission approval. We should look into whether we need to add select board or town approval to that as well. Or whether there's a blanket statement we can make that covers that. So, that being the case, I'd make that motion to move this draft forward, incorporate those two changes, and I guess move forward with our process of submitting this draft with those changes for the town warrant.
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so that motion carries. Thanks, everyone. We're gonna move on to our regular agenda. I'm hopeful that we can get through it fairly quickly. I think it's pretty light, so feel free to stay if you want to, but at the same time, feel free to take off. And the same goes for those joined by Zoom. And I'll just note, Tom, because Mike had told me you were not gonna be here tonight.
Yeah.
I did tell Dick that
Okay.
tonight he was a voting member, and so I'm just saying that for whoever ends up taking the minutes, which I think we'll discuss next, that it should be Dick reflected as voting rather than Tom.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Sorry, Tom.
No.
Big stuff going on. Powers. I'm sorry.
We'll have to catch up.
We'll catch up. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
I'll get vote from now on.
Thank you, Peter and Emily. Thanks for your contributions. Okay, moving on to the agenda. So minutes are an issue. We have a few meetings with outstanding minutes that we haven't approved yet. I think it's May, August, and October at this point. I will say that I think at this point we need to find a new minutes taker. And someone has reached out and offered to do that, and I think that, I guess, I'd just like the commission's approval to go ahead and make that switch, because I think at this point it's necessary. It sounds like there is someone who's willing to do it, and we'll pay them the same rate that we paid. That I think it is actually Julie Atwell's husband that offered to do it. So, that being the case, I think it sounds like he could get our backlog done as well, which would be nice. So is everyone okay with that?
Do we need, I have no idea how the town operates, but do we need to like document like reasons why we're switching, like this is like someone gets paid as a contract person, do we need to like document why we're doing that, or have some sort of way to say, well, here's...
You're an employee at will.
Okay.
I mean, there's no contract.
Okay.
I mean, I can confirm, I guess what I would say is we could take a vote to make that change unless there are unless there's anything that we need to do to formalize that process, that I can follow up with the town and Julie to make sure. And if not, then we can.
There's also video of it online from
Yes.
the prior dates, which you can look at to do the minutes.
Yes, that is a great point. Yeah, and I think May was still a Zoom meeting, but I think we should have the copy of that somewhere. So
It's all up there.
oh, that's right. Yeah, because you uploaded those to the website.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Great point. Thank you, Hank.
No problem.
So I make a motion to take on a new minutes taker, unless there are any things that we need to do that are pointed out by Julie and the town. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. All in favor? Say aye. Aye. Okay, so hopefully at the next meeting we'll have a slew of minutes to review and approve. Jackson Falls thanks everyone who made it to install the sod, and especially to Pam for organizing all that and ordering materials and coordinating the workday.
And I really want to thank Frank DeFrucio because he waved his wand and got poor Pat Kelly, who was on vacation, in the woods on his cell phone in order to get somebody from the highway department to come up with a pallet machine to be able to take stuff off the truck.
Oh, great.
So that was the tricky part. And
Yeah.
obviously Bob Santoro for
Yes.
doing all the hard work.
Yeah, so thanks to
And
Frank
everybody
and
else who
Bob.
came too.
Yeah.
You know, thanks guys.
For the record, I did make it. I was very late, but I helped Ken install some fence. And
I was impressed. You guys put up more fence with it. That was really nice. Yeah. I was thinking maybe put like some revegetation signs up or something so people understand what's going on.
yeah,
What I would suggest is, once we get the Prospect Farm through, is to go back and develop an overall stewardship plan for Jackson Falls. I think we've seen this already where people have misconceptions about who can use it and how and why. And some of it is driven by how the town actually ended up with it. But I think it would be good to develop a general stewardship plan next, once we finish this the same way. I mean, these are two key properties that the town owns, and they need management. There's a lot of good management stuff that's happened, and the idea of the plan is not to throw that out, but to get it all in one place, and to get the history in one place, and to get some recommendations about future, needs, the same as we're doing with Prospect Farm, would be a suggestion I would have.
that is a good thought. Yeah. That would be helpful. Did anyone happen to go by after the storm?
I did.
Okay,
It's all good.
it survived.
Oh yeah.
I was a little worried. I drove by at one point and I was
No
going to
leakage.
stop.
There isn't even any leakage. Like
Yeah.
none of the soil's even coming out. Or
Oh, good.
The one that'll be a risk that we should watch is the lower one near the river, because essentially what we have now is bedrock. We have put topsoil and then we put the sod on top. And unless that finds a way to really grab on underneath, the water at times does get up as high as where we put the lower section. I think if it can last a couple of years before we get another big pulse, it could get itself established well enough so that it won't wash. But I think if this last storm had actually come up, I'm afraid we would have probably lost that lower section, just because it's lubricated right now with the different layers.
Yep.
So I've got to, at some point, submit kind of a final invoice or set of invoices for those costs. And so I have one from Lucy that was forwarded to the town, Lucy Hardware. I have one from, I think, was it Maine Turf?
Yep.
Yeah.
What was the name turf? It's Nick. It's not Maine Turf though, it's somebody
Okay.
else. Because Maine Turf basically said, just go right to the harvester.
Oh, I see. Okay, so I think it was for the sod.
Yeah.
And maybe I just thought it was
Mhm.
Maine Turf. But were there any others that you
Henry.
have? Or?
Fred Henry, but I think
Okay.
he should have given it directly to the town.
Okay, yeah.
He was going to. That was 150, I think.
Okay.
One other suggestion I think that we ought to take a look at. A number of people have spoken to me and talked about, quote, sign pollution. And the signs are essential up there. But I think we could have signs that are not so stark, And I have talked with the Jackson Ski Touring Foundation that does have a sign maker. And, when you go to a national forest, a lot of them no parking that, or, they're against a wood type of background, etc. Whereas ours right now is just this stark row of no parking, no parking. And that's nothing against what the highway department did, because they did what was asked of them. But I think we should have some conversations with a sign maker. The Ski Touring Foundation now has actually found a way with a router. You can buy the plastic wood that has the layer underneath of the color you want. So you don't have to go back and paint the letters, which is really time consuming. The new signs that the Ski Touring Foundation is putting up is on plastic wood. It's multi-layered with different colors. You pick your colors and you just send the router down with the words you put, you know, it would be nice to have signs that say no parking that are not quite as stark as what we have up there right now. Just, I think that's something for next year, but it's something to take into consideration. I don't know what others think, but, and, you know, we did have a discussion about packed gravel down for the handicap parking. And when I walked up there, I did go up with my wife, who is handicapped. Where we are right now is probably the best location. And to have somebody who's handicapped get down to the picnic table. However, I think Ben brought this up, is sawdust is the wrong stuff. And, you know, it's a bitch to move a wheelchair through sawdust. It's like moving through soft sand. So we should take a look at what that surface is going to be. And similarly, the other suggestion I would make is where the outhouse is right now, is turn around the entrance 180 degrees. And then have a 15-minute parking spot at the top, so that if somebody wants to use the outhouse, which is marked on the new kiosk signs and that, and you're handicapped, you can't access the outhouse right now. I mean, unless somebody carried you in there. But if you have the access coming in from Valley Cross, by just rotating the door 180 degrees, it's a very short, easy, flat walk into that porta potty. So those are suggestions I would make that we take a look at over the winter to think about incorporating for next summer, spring.
I think those are good suggestions, and I think Pam you had a thought, right, about,
The surface.
Yeah.
It's a grass mat. I don't know if it'll work or not. Somebody just sent it to me, so I figured I'd share it with you guys. But it's basically something I think you just put over the wood chips. And I think you stake it in, and if it gets wood chips on top of it, you pick it up and shake it, and you can roll it up at the end of the year. I have no idea if it would work or not.
Do you know if there's any other colors? I didn't look it up, but
Yeah,
It had green.
and black, and blue. I didn't see the whole color palette, but I'd be interested to look at that, but I'm not sure, like, because all of the examples they had, it was on a well
Yeah,
compacted flat.
right. So I don't know if it would work on a slope.
Yeah,
But
'cause I've
I
walked down
think
on
packed
beaches.
gravel is normally.
I've walked down it on the way to beaches, and it's not quite as hard as sand, but it still kind of has underlying sand feel a little bit.
did it work on that?
I mean, I pushed our stroller down it with some effort, I guess. You know, it was easier, yeah, better than beach sand, but not as easy as something firmer.
Well, I sent a link for a product this evening that is a open poly high density plastic webbing that comes in different thicknesses that contains the material so it doesn't smush out, so it has a little bit more stability. I think that'll probably be better long term and incorporate the terrain a little bit easier than, and wouldn't require the maintenance of rolling it up and taking it out seasonally, or less likely to get washed away in a flood event.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Seems like a good idea.
yeah.
Benefit would be it's, pervious, so that
Yeah.
you're not causing more tree, erosion, but better for access, because I think that's important.
I mean, the impervious I would be less concerned about there, because it's such a short distance you're talking about to get from there down to the upper picnic table.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think we're looking at doing the whole trail system that way. And the best view of the falls, if you go down to lower picnic tables, you can't really see the falls going down. The best view is from that picnic table, because you can look at the whole upper falls as well as the flat before it pitches off. So, aesthetically, the spot was picked the right way the first time.
I've seen people mix wood chips with stone of, I don't know the exact
Yeah.
size of the stone, that could go with something like that too,
Yeah.
that gives you a little more firmness like stone, but doesn't really change, the wood chips kind of retain the color, the kind of the brownish color rather than looking like a stone half.
And the pitch is no different than if you come from the lower parking lot down. They're pretty much the same pitch.
I guess I'm swayed to think that the material Ben's talking about might be a good thing to try out. Maybe it's fairly cheap and we could give it a shot and see how it goes. And
Yeah, this was very little Googling sometimes. I'm sure there's lots of options in it.
Is it similar to like what people used to like have like parking areas?
that's
Is that
kind of what I'm
you're
thinking
looking
of,
at?
yeah.
Exact, I think that's what it's, the product that I found is like for driveways.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah. Seems like it'd be a cheap enough experiment to try there, and then if it doesn't work, then maybe we say we need to build a gravel path and settle it.
And what do people think about reversing
That's great.
you just unscrew this one side, put it in the other, when he comes in with a porta potty? It'd be easier for him to probably put it in there as well. I mean, the only downside is its porta potty is facing out toward Valley Cross Road, but if you want handicapped access.
I think originally we had it that way because there were some abutting neighbors that complained about it, so we spun it around, but I think if we framed it with, we're now allowing greater access to people, I think that is a good approach.
And then, as I was saying, just put 15-minute parking up there, so, you know.
And my thought is that we could do two things at once by putting the porta potty down at the lower parking area where the people are, which is most accessible for most of the little kids and the people that are there, because, you know, if you put the porta potty where the people are and you provide enough access for somebody who has a disability, you could actually accomplish two things. Because if you put the porta, I know you're saying you're putting it on the sign, and that's great, but a lot of people, the kids are still, you know, I think they're still gonna poop in the bushes, and it's only like, you know, 20 feet from the water, so.
You know, I mean, I hear you, but I've seen no evidence that anybody's been crapping in there.
No, somebody told me they saw them
Yeah.
doing it, so that was this summer.
Hopefully when we have a kiosk that can help with some of that, because my guess is people probably just don't even know it's there.
I was gonna say,
Would be my guess. There's probably a lot of that you wouldn't, because if you just park at the main lot and you hang out down there, you know, you wouldn't know to walk up to use restrooms. Because there's nothing telling you that it exists.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask, do we know, and I have no idea, like, if we wanted to change the signs, are there like specs or anything that the town has? Because I feel like every road sign on a road, they all look the same. Like, would they let us put nice ones in?
well, I mean, we'd have to check, but
Yeah.
you go up there, it's,
It made me, I never noticed that they continue all the way to the Eagle Mountain House, you know, and those have existed forever. And like all of those signs made me realize, like, oh, these other ones have been here.
I was only thinking of
Since,
the
like-
ones that are right on,
Well, I understand,
Yeah.
but I mean, from a visibility standpoint, I'm saying, like, I never consciously registered that the sign is posted no parking all the way to the Eagle Mountain House until the Falls ones went in. And then that made me cognizant of, like, oh, there's one every, whatever it is, 50 feet from
Yeah.
Valley Cross to the Eagle Mountain House. So I presume once upon a time that must have been an issue. And I don't know if that's falls parking or golf parking.
Hmm.
May I, comment
Yeah, go ahead, Dick.
on the signs? Just check with Chief Curley to see what is, legal. You know, what does he need, to be enforceable? Because I'm not sure if, it may be fine. You may be able to, you know, route out a no parking sign. I'm not sure if they have to be a certain standard. So just check with him before we get too far down the line on, redoing the parking signs. I think that the, highway department just did what they were asked to do, to put up signs, and I agree. I mean, it's almost gonna be a sign forest in there pretty soon, so, you know, if we could mitigate that, great, but, I think we should check with the chief just to make sure that that would work out for him.
I would do that, Dick.
Good point.
I have one item for Jackson Falls.
Yep.
Gary Spears from Eastern Greens. They're the ones who installed the fence, the cedar fence. There's a broken rail, and he, you know, basically maintains the fence. He called me just to let me know that there's a broken rail. We're happy to fix it. We'll get the piece of cedar that matches the existing fence. But we'll get an invoice for the repair. So if we're good with that, just to bring it to the board.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah, the original intent is at some point the fence, we're gonna let it just go, but we really never, that's not really what we're doing.
Right.
We're keeping it as long as we can, so. He just basically said, hey, are we still planning to maintain the fence?
Yeah.
And I said, well, please try to get a rail, and then we'll discuss it at our meeting.
Yeah, I think so. I think the fence looks nice. I know that was the original intent, was like the fence was gonna be a temporary, it would return back to the earth, and people can then walk wherever they want. But I think the fence looks nice. I think it looks good. Yeah, I would want to repair it.
We're good?
Yeah.
Yeah. I gave him the go-ahead, just.
Yeah, I would say so. Yep.
And I think it works.
It does
Yeah.
work. It was a good move.
Speaking of that, I guess, well, not speaking of that, but now that you're speaking, I did want to follow up with you on the kiosk
I did.
idea. Is that still something that you're considering, or?
I looked over the I think there's 3 different plans maybe within that. What's the timeline? What we actually, would we intend to put it in this fall?
It seems like probably not at this point. I'm thinking probably next spring.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, of those 3, is there one that we're strongly leaning towards? There was the one that had the full plans from the Finger Lakes, which was, the prettiest, the nicest of the bunch. And then there were the other two were kind of simple. I don't think I was here for the discussion.
I don't know if we
I
arrived.
don't think there was a discussion.
Yeah, I don't know if we arrived at a
got the
conclusion.
email.
Yeah, I think
Alright,
it
there
was
might have been.
email.
Okay.
Yeah. And I was like, Brian builds stuff.
Yeah, so I did talk with one of the guys who works with me, who's in the shop a lot. We just didn't go beyond that. I put it on the list of things and said, hey, here's another thing you could be building, as one of our shop items. But at the time, in September, October, that's just not feasible.
Yeah.
So we didn't discuss the price, we didn't lock down the materials or which one was what was the budget within that? Like, are we trying to go for the nicer version, or should we stay away from that?
If we wait till the spring, does it make sense after we finish with Prospect Farm and then circle back around, as Ken was saying, to the falls, to then bring in those 3 sometime this winter and just say,
Make a decision.
here's our decisions, here are the ones we want, let's go ahead and.
I think that's the best, because if I couldn't do it, I know a couple of guys who could, within our group of carpenters.
I think we should have the objective, though, of getting it out by the springtime.
Yeah.
I've heard from a couple of people where's the sign?
Right.
Well, we have the sign. We just don't have the
Yeah,
kiosk.
Yeah, yeah. It's currently sitting in Tin Mountain. That's where the sign is.
And people love to tell me what else to put on the sign, I'm like, no, there's 3 things.
Yeah.
How complicated is it to get a price quote on all 3 without having somebody spend a gazillion?
It's not much.
I guess that would be my thought too, is if you give us a rough idea what each would cost, that might inform. I think we had, can't remember what the exact amount was, but when we were talking to the original contractor that thought he could do it earlier this summer, I think we had a certain amount approved to be withdrawn from the Wentworth Wildcat Fund.
Is it
And
1,600?
that sounds about right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So that would help.
Yeah.
Okay. Looking at the time, I guess I would suggest that while we don't want to kick the can too far down the road, maybe we make some final decisions on some of these things at a future meeting. Although it sounds like we're generally in agreement on figuring out a solution to make the path more accessible and potentially changing the orientation of the porta potty enclosure, and that we want the fence fixed.
Yep.
Great.
I hope those boards were power screwed in so we can just.
Oh yeah, he did it. I don't remember how he did it, but they know what they're doing.
Yeah. Great. Let's
Should
see.
we wait till after the winter? To fix the rail or?
And then
I'll leave it up to
Pam, do you have an update on the community garden?
I just have somebody who volunteered to help me set it up, who lives in Jackson, but he participates in a community garden in his town in Massachusetts. But I think I need the information for the Conservation Association that we belong to, and maybe they have some resources, and also like some ideas for like finding grants, how to go about doing that.
Yeah. There's a couple of websites that, and I cannot think of the one that we use off the top of my head, but are essentially like the warehouse for grants. And you
Any
type
chance
in,
you can email me?
yeah. And then the best one I think has like some sort of, I think there's some sort of fee, but you basically just type in, gardens, composting, whatever, and you can filter it out by state.
Okay.
And it's a national database. So I should write that down, otherwise I'll never send it to you. Someone throw me one of those things.
And Pam, if you do find a grant that looks like it's a good fit, I'd be happy to help with that.
Oh, good. And I did run it by Frank DeFruscio just as an idea because he was suggesting the ice skating rink. And I'm like, community gardens are messy. So, because he said there's water over there already, but he didn't see any problem with putting it out there. So, that's.
The ice skating rink like over here.
Yeah.
Cross Summers.
Yeah, that'd be a tough spot.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that walk. A lot of
Not
people
very relaxing.
hang out
No,
there.
it wouldn't be
Trucks
relaxing,
down
and
the road.
community gardens are messy. It's a nice idea, but they're messy.
Dust covered.
Yeah, you
Crop.
have to put up, so that we could see what's going on.
Yeah.
Okay, well, keep everyone posted if you need anything. Mike, quick update on the Wild and Scenic grant?
Yeah, we Jeff as well. We had a wonderful day. I was out with the 3rd and 4th graders with Mr. Dexter Harding and Mr. Lloyd Mabbott doing water quality. We were on Prospect Farm and we went up Boggy Brook Road and then just kind of crashed into the woods a little ways, and then also at Laura Kinsey's property, so halfway down, not halfway, but down the Wildcat, and then down right here by the bridge. And it was a good time, it was fun, and then what was great about it is, so I took the 3-4 out there, and they collected data, and then while they were gone, the 2nd and 3rd graders wrote questions to ask the 3-4 about their findings, and then they got back, and they kind of asked them about it, and then you went out with the 2-3, and I believe that after that they all got together and kind of did a little comparative analysis and, what did you get for this? What were your results? And, what does this mean? And one of the best things I thought, which was so great, is so we have a couple in the CRMP for the Wildcat River and our management plan for it. We have a couple of protocols and things we're supposed to be doing, a couple of factors that we're supposed to be checking as a conservation commission. There are a couple of things we're supposed to be testing for periodically. And so the kids did some of that. So some of the easier ones that students could do, and one of them is litter and trash, and that's one of the ones that's in the CRMP. And when we got to behind Flossie's over here, we walked back there, and this was with a 4th grader who had done a similar thing in 2nd grade with Dexter, and there was trash back there. And there, so we, ticked the little box, there's trash back here. And the 4th grader said, there wasn't trash back here when we came last time 2 years ago, and there's trash now. And someone else was like, yeah, there's a lot of people in town. And it was like, oh, there are these great connections. Yes, like visitor use is up. And because visitor use is up, we're seeing evidence of, maybe new users that aren't as experienced or don't know, the right way to, dispose of their garbage and things like that. So it was like, it was really great. It was great to see kids start to make those connections. So it's going great. It's going really well. And we're going to do a few more things, and then we're going to start gearing up for the hut trip in the spring. So, very exciting things.
Nice. That's great. Yeah, I had a great time. Conservation easements. Do folks have monitoring on their radar? End of the year, before December 31st. So.
Yikes, all right.
Ben, I thought you had one scheduled. Did you do that?
Done.
What's that?
Done.
You're done. Nice. That's great.
Would it be possible for someone to send out all the link and the password stuff again? I
Yeah.
know it's somewhere in my email, but it's like,
It is yeah, it's hard to, it's the very last document in the Google Docs. It's,
okay.
I can try to find it and send it out. But if someone finds it first and wants to send it out, then feel free. I don't have anything for wetlands. Any new business from anyone?
I had one quick thing I forgot, and maybe everyone already knows this, but when I was up at Prospect Farm, a day or two ago, I hadn't noticed before, but there used to be a sign right at the junction where the Hall's Ledge goes up and Boggy Brook goes out. Like if you're in the summer parking lot and walking back towards Hall's Ledge, there used to be a sign on one of the trees right in front that said Hall's Ledge with an arrow.
Yeah.
And I couldn't find that sign. And I don't know if it, like I even like walked over and I didn't spend a lot of time, but I like looked over and looked in the woods for a minute. And the only reason I even thought about it is there was a group that were trying to find Hall's Ledge and they didn't know where to go. And I was like, oh, well, there's a sign here and it points that way. And I was like, then walk to that sign. And I was like, oh, there's
Then you walk up to the big kiosk and there's a map.
Yeah, there's a map, yeah. I mean, I guess there are plenty of resources for them to use, but it just made, I realized that sign with that arrow is not there anymore, which I thought was helpful, because you go to like what looks like the official trailhead, and
Right.
it tells you to turn around and go that way, and then you walk back. And then...
Once you start up, there's signs that say.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That one-
Quail Trail and all the other junctions there are.
That one was a Forest Service sign.
Oh, was it?
When they installed so when the parking lot was created, there wasn't that trailhead sign.
Right.
When they put the trailhead sign in, they added that little directional arrow right there, and it was like brown, it was Forest Service colors
Yeah.
on a tree.
Right.
Because I remember brushing it out once to try to make it more visible. So we could either ask them to get a new one. The other ones that say Hall's Ledge that are white with green letters, the AMC sign maker made for the Conservation Commission.
Okay.
So we could ask. I could ask.
And maybe I should go double check again. I didn't see it, but I didn't look real hard, but I think I'd be able to see it. So I'll just double check one more time, make sure it's really out there.
Yeah, and then it sounds like maybe you'd be able to ask Tom if we can
Yeah.
get another one made.
Yeah, I can ask. Yeah, because I know last time he was able to. He had extra materials and could donate his time, and I could ask again
Great.
to make one if that would be possible. Hall's Ledge, right arrow. And I guess that'd be a good point too for the map, because I forget that map if it's the summer winter thing basically. That if that map on the kiosk is well labeled enough that if you're standing there and you want to go to Hall's Ledge and hike and see the view, if you could follow it, it might be labeled. The Class 6 road might be labeled on the map rather than as a hiking trail to go up to Hall's Ledge.
I'm gonna suggest that, once we get this stewardship plan through, is we just redo that kiosk.
Yeah.
Because we've got the updated map that came with the forest management plan. We'll have the regulations up there, and we can have some of the history of it as well. I mean, the stand is there, it just needs to change the,
Pop off.
Didn't we talk about switching it to the direction?
But spinning it, so when you
Yeah.
drive up, you can see it.
I always thought that'd be a good idea, so you
Yeah.
can see it when you first walk up.
Yeah, 90 degrees, maybe got a couple trees in the corner. You need to.
That makes sense. Anything else?
I had a thought based on kind of on some of the discussion on the management plan.
Yeah.
Maybe it's slightly outside the scope of Conservation Commission and would be like an entity like the Jackson Falls group, but kind of a holistic view of user impact in town kind of thing. Because it seems like a lot of what we touch on with managing town properties is like dealing with increased use.
Yeah.
So whether that's a conservation thing to like look at a big picture and make recommendations to the town or somebody else, but that's a whole like big can of worms. It's a super big can of worms.
It almost seems like something that would be better served by an independent consultant, as much as I know people would might be averse to someone
totally.
from outside coming in and telling us what to do, but
Yeah.
might help.
Because it seems like so many issues in town are touching on that.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. It's a good
outside of
thought.
just the town properties.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, we do have funds available to pay for something like that, so it's something we could consider.
Hmm.
Unless Ken wants to do all of them.
No.
Dick, anything else to add tonight?
No, I'm happy with my additions and, I enjoyed the conversation.
All right. Well, thanks for joining. I guess I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting. Mike seconds, Brian seconds. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, like, why am I so tired? I know, 8:30 at night.
Let's talk to you.
Yeah.